Okay, guys. So we're going to be starting a new topic today. It's the attachment topic. It is a paper one topic, so all of the subtopic notes, everything that you write to do with attachment, you should put in your paper one folder. So the attachment topic would come up in the paper one exam. So we've been doing research methods for a couple of weeks. We're going to move away from that now, and we're going to be spending the foreseeable future doing the attachment topic. So if I could just draw your attention to this, this is the attachment topic planner. So normally I give you one of these at the start of the topic for any kind of new topic that we start. Obviously I can't give you one of these in person, so there is an instructional video that I've posted on the same lesson that I'm going to post this one in, showing you how to access this in terms of a digital copy from Godalming Online. So if you could access that, just so that you can see all of what the attachment topic is about. So what we're going to be looking at for lesson 1 of attachment is something called caregiver-infant interactions, and the objective from today is to be able to describe what a caregiver-infant interaction is, and also looking more closely at the different types of caregiver-infant interactions, which are reciprocity and interactional synchrony. So we're going to look at what those definitions are and their purpose in forming an attachment between a baby and their primary caregiver. So to start off with, you're probably wondering what is a definition of attachment, or how would you define what an attachment actually is. So what I would like you to do first is pause the video and find yourself a definition for attachment and add it to your notes. So this is kind of a really good starting point for the topic. Always good to start with a key term definition. Okay, so pause the video and look for a good definition of attachment from a kind of psychology point of view. Okay, so here's a definition that I've got that I found online. Hopefully yours is probably quite similar. If yours was completely different, it might be that you looked at the wrong sort of thing, so you can always put this one in instead. But largely the definition of attachment is a close two-way emotional bond between two individuals in which each individual sees the other as essential for their own emotional security. Attachment in humans takes a few months to develop. Okay, so obviously we're going to be looking at from birth to the development of attachment, so it can take a few months. And why do we need to form these bonds? So attachments are really, really important to form as a baby, and the reason why is because you probably would imagine that they're for survival purposes. So the difference between when a human baby is born compared to other mammals, or for example like elephants are actually a species that are born quite late on in their stage of development, so they can already kind of walk, stand, run around as soon as they kind of are born. However, babies aren't able to do that, so they are born at a really early stage of development, so they're really dependent on their primary caregiver. So they have to form this attachment or this bond with an adult who's going to protect and nurture them so that they can survive. So it's a survival instinct. It's an inbuilt physiological process. It's subconscious. They have to form an attachment, otherwise nobody's going to look after them. They're not going to be able to be fed, or have any milk or be cuddled. So basic survival needs need to be met through attachment. So that's the kind of purpose of the attachment. So we can see the short-term benefit of attachment is survival. The long-term benefits of building an attachment is emotional relationships. So there's lots and lots of research. So as we go through the topic, there's loads of research that finds that the first sort of quality of the attachment as a child or in infancy can act as like a really solid template and foundation for later relationships. So a lot of the time you see in adult relationships, even if it's friendships or sexual relationships, so between boyfriend and girlfriend, the quality of that relationship is often all drawn all the way back to their early childhood, and how much of a strong and quality bond they held with usually their mother, but their primary caregiver. So that's why forming an attachment so early is so important. So going back to the start, so with babies, so when babies are first born, how are they actually able to communicate to their caregiver? So they're trying to build this bond to ensure their survival, but how are they actually able to do this? Because obviously we know that when babies are born, they can't actually talk. So what I'd like you to do is copy out this mind map. So do a little mind map in your notes. How can babies communicate with their caregiver? And I want you to just brainstorm all of your thoughts and ideas about different ways in which babies are able to communicate without obviously being able to talk. Okay, so for example, you could put smiling, okay, just as an example in terms of what I'm sort of looking for. Okay, so try and fill that in, come up with a few of your own ideas. You can pause the video to do that. Okay, so uh, basically, how a child or a baby forms an initial bond is via non-verbal communication. So communicating without words, obviously they can't speak yet, so they wouldn't be able to communicate with words. And sometimes without sound is the sort of first stepping stone in building that secure attachment. So it kind of forms the basis or the foundation for that. And it's often observed that it's the manner in which the baby and the caregiver respond to each other that can help identify and determine the strength of the bond or attachment, how that's actually formed, so the formation of that attachment, and also the quality of that attachment. And they'll do this by carrying out lots of sort of observations and looking at how babies and their parents interact with one another. So the more sensitive they are to each other's signals, it gives kind of insight into how deep their relationship is. So if they're not very responsive to one another or they don't really understand each other non-verbally, then it's usually a sign that maybe the attachment isn't quite as secure as it should be at that point. So there are two different types or two different main types of caregiver-infant interactions. These are reciprocity and interactional synchrony. So this is the kind of initial stages, the very first time any kind of attachment will be seen to be starting to form, and it's via these two things. So we need to define these. So reciprocity is basically where an infant coordinates their actions with a caregiver. So it can sometimes be described as like a back and forth non-verbal conversation type thing. So from very early on, so straight away from birth, babies tend to kind of move in a rhythm when they interact with an adult. So it's almost like they're taking turns. So reciprocity, so it's reciprocal, meaning you go, I start talking, the baby then does something to respond and react. The adult then responds to that, and it kind of one response elicits another response from the other. So they kind of it's like this turn taking back and forth as people would do in a proper kind of adult verbal conversation. So interactional synchrony is very similar. It's quite sometimes difficult to separate them, but the difference between reciprocity and interactional synchrony is interactional synchrony is when the baby is carrying out the same action as the adult, but at the exact same time. So almost like they are looking in a mirror. So it's proper mimicking as opposed to turn taking. So reciprocity, it's like you go, I go. They take turns, and interactional synchrony is when they are both mimicking and carrying out the same action at the same time. So they are mirroring each other. And there was a famous study conducted on interactional synchrony by Meltzoff and Moore, and they found that there was an association, so a link between the expression or gesture that the adult would display and the actions of the baby. So they were looking at if an adult was to pull a funny face, does the baby kind of mirror and copy that facial expression from the adult? So what I would like you to do is I would like you to have a little look at that video. You're going to have to just pause and type that link in. I know it's a little bit long, but you can type in that link. You could probably find it by typing in Meltzoff and Moore study, but I'm not sure if it's going to come up with the same one, so it's best off to just type in that link. And then once after you've looked at that video, I want you to again just research that study and summarize it in a little bit more detail into your notes. So the aim, so what were they trying to find out? The procedure, so what did they do? The results, so what did they actually find? And then what would they conclude? So you link that back to the theory of interactional synchrony for that. Okay, so you can pause the video now and have a little look at that video. Okay, so another bit of research on interactional synchrony came from Isabella et al., so Isabella and colleagues, and they observed 30 mothers and their babies and assessed the interactional synchrony between them. So I want you to do the exact same, but not in as much detail, because this isn't as much of a key study, but it's still useful to have as evaluation, so like supportive evidence. I want you to look up the study, and I want you to write a brief summary of no more than 50 words. It doesn't have to be incredibly detailed, just of what they did, so what Isabella and her colleagues did, and what they found. Okay. Okay, once you have done that, we're going to be looking at some evaluation in a minute, but first, a lot of the research on reciprocity and interactional synchrony will be using observations. So I think I mentioned this earlier on. So observations is where the psychologist will purely just look at the baby's behaviour and also the caregiver's behaviour, and they will create categories for behaviour. So if you remember when we covered observations in one of our research methods lessons, you come up with kind of like a list of categories that are really specific, really operationalized, so that they can't cross over, and then they will tally down key behaviors that they witness, and they'll use that to help establish kind of what's going on in terms of the type of attachments, whether reciprocity, interactional synchrony is taking place, and how often these behaviors are taking place to help identify the strength and all of that sort of stuff. So observations, that's just another little bit of AO1 description. That is how they will measure these caregiver-infant interactions. Okay, so we're going to look at some evaluation now. So before we look at the kind of evaluation, because the only evaluation that I'm going to be talking about from now is kind of the negatives, so the cons of the theory of interactional synchrony and reciprocity. If you're wondering where the strengths are, we have just kind of gone through them. So the Isabella et al. Research and the Meltzoff and Moore study, they are both going to be supportive bits of evidence. So you are using those really ultimately like case studies. Those will be your kind of two strengths or main strengths of the theory. And now we're going to be looking at the weaknesses. So we're going to do this in the Peel format. So the point, so one limitation of the theory is that observations can't always tell us the purpose of interactional synchrony and reciprocity. So they do a really good job of observing and describing what's going on, but they don't actually explain the purpose. So why are those interactions taking place, and how does that form an attachment? They basically just show that they are taking place. So they can be reliably observed, meaning that the chances of them seeing those behaviours are quite high and they're very reliable, but it doesn't tell us the purpose of those interactions. So it's almost like saying that the research here is a little bit too simplistic or a little bit reductionist, and perhaps more research into the area needs to be conducted to actually explain what those interactions are for, as opposed to whether or not they occur or not. Okay. Another issue is that it's not found in all cultures. So this idea of reciprocity and interactional synchrony is that sometimes you won't actually observe that behaviour cross-culturally. So a bit of research by Levine et al. Reported that Kenyan mothers don't often have that much physical interaction or contact with their babies, but they have found that they do have secure attachments to their babies. So it's almost like you don't have to have interactional synchrony and reciprocity as a measure of a secure attachment, because it doesn't always happen in all cultures, yet the babies still end up forming these strong bonds. So it's not really a good way of measuring strength and quality of an attachment. So the research might only be culturally bound to the cultures that they have come from or they've researched. So something called cultural bias, meaning that you've conducted a bit of research in one culture and then just assumed it to be the same in other cultures, which it's not. Okay, so it reduces the validity, so the accuracy of the research, as it doesn't take all cultures into account. Therefore, you can't really generalize the theory. You can only it's confined within the culture it was conducted in originally. Okay, so you've got two strengths with the research studies. You've got the Isabella and the Meltzer and Morris strengths, and then you've got those two weaknesses that I've just covered. So we're going to finish off today with a practice application style exam question. So you can pause the video, have a go at this question, and I think that's actually the last thing. Let's just, yeah. Okay, so that's the end. So pause the video, read through that question. I'm not going to read it out. You can read it out. It's a 4-mark question, so think about what you need to do to actually get the 4 marks and complete that. So all of the tasks from the PowerPoint today and this question will be what you would need to submit to our assignment on Teams. So I'll make a little bit of more of a note of what you have to do for that. Okay.